Welcome to WhiskyCast, cask strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie. This is episode number 937 for March 27th, 2022. Coming up in a few minutes.
It allowed us to kind of catch up, the state here to catch up and really celebrate the history of bourbon and the tradition of bourbon. And, you know, there's a couple other places that you can that has similar laws, but it made it pretty easy for us to celebrate it in that way with the vintage stuff. It's just people love seeing history in a glass, and they love looking at the labels and what the time period that bottle came out with the labels is just a fun thing to do.
Kentucky is one of the few places where it's legal for individuals to sell off their whiskey collections as long as the buyer is a licensed retailer, restaurant, or bar. Justin Sloan and Justin Thompson have been among the most active players in that market. Their Justin's House of Bourbon stores in Lexington and Louisville have become a stopping-off place for bourbon tourists not only looking for vintage bottles to buy, but also to sell off some of those family heirloom bottles, too. We'll talk with the Justins later on WhiskyCast In-Depth. That's just ahead, along with the What I'm Tasting This Week department, your voice, behind the label, and...
The UK is a huge market for American whiskey and bourbon. In the UK, we absolutely love the category. And so it means that there's going to be more variety. And also, we're not going to be having to waste our money on the tariff anymore.
The news is next on this week's WhiskyCast.
Dewar's brand ambassador Gabriel Cardarella here. And as the weather starts to finally warm, I wanted to remind everyone of one of the best ways to float in a pool with your favorite whiskey. The Dewar's Highball is simple and refreshing. Anyone can make it. Dewar's, ice, club soda, and a citrus garnish is all you need. Cheers.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
The average college basketball power forward is 6'9", which, according to my rough calculations, is 16.5 times my height. I'll stick to aimlessly pottering around in back gardens.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast, Redbreast. Pass it on.
Let's get started with the news. It's brought to you by the Dalmore. 4 years of British tariffs on imports of bourbons and other American whiskeys will come to a welcome end on June 1st. British and U.S. officials announced an agreement Tuesday on the end of U.S. tariffs on British steel and aluminum imposed back in 2018 by the Trump administration. That move cleared the way for Great Britain to end its retaliatory 25% tariff on U.S. whiskeys and other consumer goods. British Secretary of State for International Trade Anne-Marie Trevelyan spent 2 days in Baltimore meeting with U.S. Trade Representative Catherine Tai. They discussed the future of U.S.-UK trade leading up to the announcement.
Our discussions here in Baltimore, we've made a really strong start, and I'm really looking forward to welcoming Ambassador Tai and her team to Scotland in April, where we'll be able to continue these important discussions and perhaps, just perhaps, show you what a distillery looks like in its finest form.
The trade dispute has cost whiskey makers on both sides of the Atlantic millions of dollars in lost sales, and the end of that dispute is being welcomed by industry leaders. Chris Swanger is the CEO of the Distilled Spirits Council.
I think we need to take the learnings from the sad experiences that we've encountered over the last 3-4 years, work with our EU and UK counterparts, and try to work with the governments, both in the UK and the EU and the US government, hopefully to put mechanisms in place to avoid this going forward.
Give me a sense of the damage these tariffs have caused over the last 4 years.
Great question, Mark. And look, you never know. We don't fully understand and appreciate the impact, but, I think we all recognize it takes a lot of time, effort, and investment to build a brand, to build the American whiskey brand. And, as you're aware, we lost 42% share in export. to the UK and 37% share in export of American whiskey to the EU. So I think what we need to do now is work hard and invest back into those markets and make sure that European and UK consumers really recognize and see the great benefits and the heritage of American whiskey.
The move is also being welcomed in the UK. Bourbon Alliance founder Martha Dalton expects demand for American whiskeys to rebound quickly once the tariffs come off.
It may have seemed like this was a foregone conclusion, but actually, if you cast your mind back to the Christmas just gone, the UK was talking about doubling the tariffs, not scrapping them. And so actually, in quite a short space of time, through, the work of the Bourbon Alliance, and all of our, colleagues in the UK and in the US, there's actually been a really quick mobilization. And so, we're just really thankful to the whole industry and to politicians and all the negotiators on both sides of the pond to have getting this done in a good time, because it's definitely at Christmas, it felt like it wasn't going to happen. So I think that's just something that we're really pleased. They finally managed to do the deal. It's the right thing.
How soon do you expect the impact of the end of the tariffs to be felt once the June 1st deadline comes through?
Well, 4 years can't be, 4 years of damage can't be repaired overnight. We know that imports over that period of time went down 42%, but we know there's huge pent-up demand, and we're really confident that it's going to rebound and recover really quickly, and we're hoping to get back to double-digit growth pretty soon.
Give me a sense of what it's been like for you as a whiskey lover the last 4 years.
I think it's been really frustrating, to be honest. And I think that with the UK leaving the EU, we thought that the tariffs would come off. And actually, it wasn't as simple as that. And so we've been really frustrated, but we're just delighted that they've come off. Obviously, the entire hospitality industry, because of COVID, has been having a really difficult couple of years. And so I'm sure, you feel the same. You just want to get back into a bar, enjoy your favorite whiskey and have a good time. And I think that, the whole of the UK is going to be joining us in doing that very soon.
Dalton's own business can move forward now that the tariffs are ending. She and her partners have been trying to launch the Never Say Die bourbon brand for several years, but the tariffs made it difficult for them to justify sourcing bulk bourbon to import into the UK. Another bit of good news for the Kentucky whiskey industry. The state Senate in Frankfort passed House Bill 500 Thursday night. That's the bill that clarifies state regulations on private barrel selections, along with allowing satellite tasting rooms for distilleries. The bill now heads to Governor Andy Beshear for his signature. In other news, one of Europe's annual whiskey traditions is being canceled again this year, but this time it is not because of COVID. The organizers of Maltstock announced on Thursday that this September's gathering has to be canceled because the campground they use each year is being taken over by the Netherlands government. It'll be used for housing Ukrainian refugees through at least the end of October. There is a slight chance they might be able to find another venue to host Maltstock, but as of now, the plans are to wait until September of next year. Whiskey Magazine announced the results of its Icons of Whiskey and World Whiskies Awards Thursday night in London. Buffalo Trace was named Distiller of the Year, while Australia's Sullivan's Cove Distillery was named Craft Distiller of the Year. Middleton's Kevin O'Gorman was named the Master Distiller / Master Blender of the Year. And in the World Whiskies Awards, the Lakes Distillery in England took home World's Best Single Malt honors for Deval Gandhi's Whiskey Maker's Reserve No. 4, while Redemption Barrel Proof High Rye 10 years old won the award for the World's Best Bourbon. Finally, the International Wine and Spirits Competition unveiled its 2022 trophy winners this week as well. Black Bottle Alchemy Series Double Cask won the trophy for Best Blended Scotch Whiskey, while Deanston Virgin Oak was named the Best No Age Statement Single Malt Scotch. Ballantyne's the Glenbergie 12-year-old from Chivas Brothers won among single malt scotches 15 years old and younger, while the Glendronach 16-year-old Boynes Mill won among single malts 16 to 25 years old. Tomatin's 1976 single malt won the trophy for those malts over 25 years old. Japan's Nagahama distillery took top Asian whiskey honors for its Bordeaux red wine cask single malt. Redbreast 27 won the Irish Whiskey Trophy. Heaven Hill's Larceny Barrel Proof Batch A122 was the Bourbon Trophy winner, while Redemption Barrel Proof 10-year-old Rye won the Best Rye Trophy. We have a link to the complete list of medal winners in the show notes for this episode at whiskycast.com. You can keep up on the latest whiskey news all week long at whiskycast.com and on our social media timelines. The news is brought to you by the Dalmore.
Hello, Richard Patterson here, Master Distiller, Master Blender for the Dalmore. You know, whenever the team and I are in the world sharing our exceptional single malt, we like to keep in touch with Mark Gillespie and the latest news from WhiskyCast.
Join us Friday nights at 5 p.m. New York time for the Happy Hour live webcast featuring some of the biggest names in whiskey. You can catch all the fun on the WhiskyCast YouTube channel, our Facebook page, Twitter, and Twitch. If you missed last Friday night's show with beer and spirits author Tara Nurin, the on-demand replay is available right now at our YouTube channel. Time now for the WhiskyCast calendar of events brought to you by Catoctin Creek Distilling. Tickets are still available for Whiskey and Barrel Night coming up April 7th in Tampa and on April 28th in Washington, D.C. McTeers has its next whiskey auction April 15th in Glasgow, Scotland. Fred Minnick will lead one of his blind bourbon tastings on April 16th in Green Bay, Wisconsin. The Nth Universal Whiskey Experience is April 22nd and 23rd in Las Vegas, and the Whiskey Fair is that same weekend in Limburg, Germany. The Spirit of Speyside Festival takes place April 27th through May 2nd in Scotland, and Whiskey on the Rocks is April 28th through May 1st at The Rocks in Sydney, Australia. Remember, all in-person events are still subject to change on short notice, and you may have to show proof of vaccination or a recent negative COVID test in order to attend. The calendar of events is brought to you by Catoctin Creek Distilling, makers of the Virginia Rye Whiskey. You'll find their Roundstone Rye at fine whiskey shops in 26 U.S. states, 3 continents, and online. Visit the new BuyVirginiaRye.com site for more details, and please drink responsibly.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
Robin Redbreast? You may have seen me around. Face label, label face. Yeah, that's the one. I'm now contractually obligated to be their spokesbird. Yeah, my agent didn't read the small print.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
WhiskyCast In-Depth is brought to you by Mortlock and the Classic Malts lineup. Retailers traditionally look for the next big thing, that new whiskey or spirit that will bring customers into the store. But the passage of Kentucky's vintage spirits law several years ago created a new market for the old, the forgotten bottles left collecting dust on someone's shelf. That is when Justin Sloan and Justin Thompson decided to open a store devoted to not only the new, but the vintage. The first Justin's House of Bourbon in Lexington, Kentucky, was joined by a second store in Louisville, and both now sell everything from pre-Prohibition bottles to the rarities of today, along with today's current bottlings. The Justins have also gotten into the whiskey business for themselves as consultants and blenders. They're working with horseman Guinness McFadden to create the Blackwood Bourbon brand. I sat down with Justin Sloan in the speakeasy room at their Lexington store earlier this month, while we were waiting for Justin Thompson and Guinness McFadden to join us. So how did you and JT decide to start up this business?
It was kind of kicked around the idea to do something with the vintage whiskey, and then when we got the word that House Bill 100 will pass, we quickly moved on figuring out how to make it happen. And with his collection, my collection, we decided, hey, let's see if we can make it work. Started, the vision kind of came together, and we opened February 6, 2018.
And House Bill 100 was the sort of landmark bill that finally made it legal for at least people in Kentucky to be able to sell those vintage bottles that had been gathering dust around their house or mom and dad's house or something like that, right?
Yeah, it allowed us to kind of catch up, the state here to catch up and really celebrate the history of bourbon and the tradition of bourbon. And, there's a couple other places that you can that has similar laws, but it made it pretty easy for us to celebrate it in that way with the vintage stuff. It's just people love seeing history in a glass, and they love looking at the labels and what the time period that bottle came out with the labels is just a fun thing to do.
So how often do you get people bringing in bottles?
Every day, yeah. We get them quite a bit. There's a steady influx of people traveling to come in. They'll travel from all over the place to come in and let us take a look at it and maybe value it for them or just kind of interested in selling it or whatever, yeah. So
how often do you actually wind up buying them?
It really depends on the time of year, the inventory we have in stock, and kind of, that's kind of where, we find out if, there's JT.
Westby, how are you?
Justin, how you doing?
Good to see you.
Have a seat.
We're recording a little bit for House of Bourbon right now.
Oh, okay.
Have a seat, man. Just talking about people bringing stuff in and all that fun stuff.
We are joined by Justin Thompson, the other co-founder of Justin's S' House of Bourbon. What's been the most unusual thing that's come through the doors? And I'll ask you this, Justin.
We had a big, was it a 3-gallon? Or 2 gallon, excuse me, a 2-gallon bottle from, I believe it was from 1911. Cedar Brook.
Yeah.
That was made for a hotel in Wisconsin. And that's starting to slip through my mind here. Someone brought that in. I know there was one that was sold, I think through Christie's, maybe 6 or 7 years ago. So we felt pretty good about the provenance and all that kind of stuff. And it was just an odd format. They basically, it was in a wooden box container made for rail transportation. And it's just a really neat piece. Really dark juice, really clear, clear without any fragments in it, or the whiskey wasn't showing any signs of breaking down. And went to a pretty neat home there. The thing is, the old bottles I think are extremely cool. They're obviously some of the most rare things, but a lot of collectors still are more interested in things that have come out the last 10 or 12 years. So the older bottles do tend to sit for a while, but we're happy when they find a good home there. But that's been one of the more unique bottles been brought in here. We've got a few bottles from the Mellon Old Overholt collection from 1909. Some great old rye. And I don't know. I mean, just like I said, the really old stuff that potentially is like, is it the last time I'm ever going to see this again? That's what really gets me kind of excited and fired up. And I wish more people got, fired up with their pocketbook about that. But hey, it's okay.
The 2 gallons for the Plankington Hotel.
Yeah.
It's just gone. Like just came to my brain.
So yeah, that was one of the more unique bottles we've seen in here, and it was just we thought the gallons were cool. Well, this is a 2 gallon, so just there's still some really rare fun stuff out there that we haven't even seen, and I mean we look forward to hopefully seeing more of that stuff.
Do you think there are still a lot of vintage bottles hidden away that people don't know about?
I don't know if people don't know about it. Somebody knows about them, but they might not know that they're special or they're worth of value or have a piece of history. I think it every day we come, people come up with a family member passed away, and they found these whiskeys, and maybe they don't know the value, or maybe they just drink them, or we've heard that story too. I found some old whiskey, it was good, so it's like, that was a pretty a desirable bottle, and you tell them that, and they're like, oh man, I shouldn't drink that.
I definitely think there is. I mean, people have to grasp what the volume was back in the 50s and 60s. And that really was bourbon's golden era, post World War II. The supplies of barrels that we know about, we just now surpassed that a few years ago of what the peak of the late 60s, early 70s was, of what back then became a glut because they, just became out of style to buy bourbon. But to think of what they sold and marketed from the late 40s, 50s, and 60s, I mean, they had a great, 20-plus year run there. I mean, millions and millions of bottles. So, I mean, they got consumed. There wasn't much of a collecting aspect of it back then, but, I mean, just to have that much volume out, and, I mean, they're going to turn up for a while.
You mentioned provenance, and obviously that's the key. How can you tell when somebody's trying to put something over on you?
We've seen so much of this stuff already. It's pretty telling. It's pretty telling. Like when somebody comes in with a wonky story or something. But it's it doesn't happen very often, and when it does, it's pretty obvious. That story from how they got it and where they got it, usually the sniff test gets past a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, there are some physical aspects to consider depending on the bottle, what era it's from, things like that, and then if something is fishy, then, it's pretty. We will pass on if anything's fishy, obviously, and then we'll almost always try to at least hang on to the bottle through some means, so we can have a second or third opinion if it's needed or warranted there. So, but obviously, every category of liquor, whether it's wine or Scotch or now bourbon, we've seen folks that are out there trying to counterfeit things. So it's definitely something to be vigilant about and stay on top of and be aware that folks enjoy the low fruit,
What did you think of Clay Reisen's piece in the New York Times a few weeks ago that had that headline that your $1,000 bottle of bourbon may be a fake?
I think it was definitely attention-getting headline, and him, being up there in New York with some of the things that happen at Ackers and that kind of stuff. I think it definitely brings anything that can bring attention to the counterfeit stuff and is definitely a positive. And I think that he did a really good job of spelling out and kind of showing what could happen in this industry with ignorance or just a blind eye.
Yeah, I mean, anytime you're doing business with someone that you've never done business with, and possibly even doing it without meeting them face to face, and you're talking about potentially thousands of dollars being passed from one hand to another, you just have to use some common sense sometimes on whether, is a deal too good to be true, or is this something where, if you need to have some recourse down the road, I mean, how are you going to obtain that? So, we are brick and mortar, we're not hiding in the shadows. So, I mean, I think that gives some people some confidence in, what they are going home with there. But Clay's piece I thought was well done, well researched, obviously. There are going to be probably more high profile cases of this down the road at some point. But, just for folks to just have a little bit of patience and just to really, get to know the seller before they buy anything like that is always good advice. Whether if it's baseball cards or art or whatever, that's always even if you got to pay a little extra money, it's probably worth it there.
You guys have made the transition from not only selling vintage bourbons and current day stuff to getting into the bottling business yourselves. Tell me about Blackwood Bourbon.
I think I think Guinness should bring this up. Guinness McFadden, he's kind of the brainchild behind it. We got brought in to help with the whiskey a little bit, but he can kind of tell you his background and what Blackwood is to him. And I think that's the better route. Let him come from him.
Guinness?
Well, Blackwood came about with JT and talking to Sloan, and kind of wanted to get in and wanted to get involved but didn't know how to. And through conversations with them, we kind of had an idea and had a loose business plan, and some barrels came on the market and we went for it. We bought them. And 20 months later, here we are. We've got a product that I think everyone's pretty proud of.
There's a lot of that going around with barrels coming on the market and people starting brands. What makes yours different?
Well, that's a great question. I think being in the toasted market, it's something that's been getting more and more popular. So that was an avenue we thought we could, go down and put out a product that we would like to drink. That's pretty much what this is. It's stuff we like to drink, and with Justin and Justin's influence in the game and knowing exactly what's going on from a blending standpoint, just said let's see what we can produce, and they came up with a pretty good blend. So I think that's our kind of ace in the hole is their palates.
Yeah. So Guinness has been great to work with there, and his partners, and they did come across. Now, you said this has been getting more popular. It's actually very difficult at the moment to find, especially Kentucky aged bourbon at the moment. So we got some of the last barrels that were in 6 to 7, 8 years old. But Guinness gave us a lot of tools to work with, and being able to double barrel this first batch here, not only toasted barrels, but lightly charred barrels and char number 4, heavy charred barrels. So we basically had 3 ingredients to work with: the toasted barrels, the lightly charred barrels, and the heavy charred, all double barreled there. So, and then, Sloan and I worked for a few months on trying to figure out what the right blend of those ingredients were. And we came up with one that was majority toasted barrels, with some light and some heavy in there. And we were thinking originally, hey, we'll do something close to 100 proof. That sounds good, 100 proof, and down the road we'll do something that's barrel proof. And then we just got drinking that barrel proof. We're like, man, this is pretty damn good. So we thought that had the most complexity behind it. We did think that, for the true enthusiasts, that's kind of what they like to have as an option. So we just went ahead and said we're just going to go for the barrel proof there, and Guinness gave us a green light to do it, and that's so we got not only is it toasted, but like I mentioned, it's got some other char levels involved in the double barreling process, and then also we're coming in at the barrel proof at 121 there, so we're real happy.
I think that's a space in the market too, the barrel proof toasted Kentucky, that's not really been tapped yet. And I think that's kind of another reason is like, man, this is like we could go down to 100 or 90, but man, like nope, this is way better at Foolproof or at the barrel proof, and there's not really anything else out there that's barrel proof toasted Kentucky stuff. So let's shoot for it and see what happens, and it's got a good reception so far.
Guinness, what are your plans for this brand besides trying to get outside of the state of Kentucky since it's only available here right now?
So I think, as you can tell just from what they had to say, I pretty much leave the artistic direction of the bourbon to them. What we have, I lean heavily on them. Where would we like to go? I'm not even sure we're focusing on Kentucky right now and trying to kind of build a brand. We do have a few more SKUs that we plan to release here over the next, 6 to 18 months. And then I think we try and find a home is kind of the next thing in my mind.
Does that mean building a distillery?
Yeah, I think we'd like to try to, for sure. This has been well received. It's been a really, really fun project to date. And yeah, I think that's the natural evolution of the idea.
So you are now successful in two of Kentucky's traditions, in horse racing and bourbon. Tell me about the horse racing part.
Well, I don't know about successful, but horse racing, I moved here 15 years ago to get in the horse industry, and, worked at Three Chimneys for 11 of those years and ran into some good people and had some good mentoring, and it's been a really fun ride. Now I've got a training center called Blackwood Stables in between Versailles and Midway, and we, start young horses and rehabilitate injured horses. We train a couple off the farm as well, so it's fun.
You had some success in the Derby a couple of years ago, though, didn't you?
Yeah, we did. In 2019, we won Derby 145 with Country House. That was pretty fun. A lot of fun.
And you're being modest about the success part, because I think anybody who's into horses would say, well, yeah, we won the Derby. So, yeah, that would be a success, I think, in my book.
Yeah, sure. It was definitely a success. Not something that it was even ever really a goal, because that's just a little bit too lofty. I think you want to set your goals somewhat attainable. But yeah, it happened. So pretty wild.
So how do you set your goals attainably for Blackwood?
Oh, I'm going to be much more irresponsible with those goals. World domination is what we're going for. No, we're trying to do something craft and kind of community oriented. Something that's Kentucky. So it's while you'd like it to be a resounding financial success, I think the most important thing is, do you enjoy doing it? Because if you don't, it's going to be a struggle. So I think how hard could it be, right? I mean, if the worst thing is that it doesn't work out. So we're gonna,
I think, drink a lot.
Yeah. Worst case scenario is the partners have a lot of whiskey to drink. So I'm a risk taker, and this feels less risky than some other businesses I've done. So I'm all in. Let's see how it goes.
While Justin's does carry the Blackwood Bourbon, it's also sold at other retailers in Kentucky for around $150 a bottle. That's WhiskyCast In-Depth. It's brought to you by Mortlock, whiskey's best-kept secret. Hidden away for decades in some of the world's most famous Scotch whiskeys comes a single malt inspired by an original for a fortunate few. Discover the entire Mortlock lineup at malts.com. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Sagamore Spirit, and let's start with the Blackwood Toasted Bourbon. It's bottled at 60.5% ABV, and the nose is nice and aromatic with touches of charred oak, toasted caramel, a hint of butterscotch, honey, vanilla, and dried tree fruits. The taste has a good balance of spices and sweetness, with touches of cinnamon, allspice, and a hint of chili powder, complemented by honey, toasted caramel, and a hint of red apples. The finish is long with lingering spices, charred oak, honey, and toasted caramel. I'm scoring the Blackwood Toasted Bourbon a 91. Now, while I was at Justin's, I had the chance to try one of those whiskeys that is often hard, if not downright impossible, to find, the Weller Foolproof Wheated Bourbon from Buffalo Trace. It's bottled at 57% ABV. The nose is gentle and smooth, full of toasted oak, honey, apple pie, and nutmeg. The taste has spices that come alive slowly and build up to a crescendo with cinnamon candies, allspice, and a touch of cardamom on top of apple pie sweetness in the background. The spices last and last on the finish with subtle touches of dried fruits. I'm scoring the Weller Foolproof Wheated Bourbon a 95. I'll have more tasting notes in just a minute, but first, our tasting notes are brought to you by Sagamore Spirit Rye Whiskey. They're reviving the tradition of Maryland-style rye at their Baltimore farm and waterfront distillery, and they're offering WhiskyCast listeners a free virtual guided tasting. When you buy a bottle at your local retailer, a Sagamore Spirit teammate will guide you through it. Visit SagamoreSpirit.com and use the code word WhiskyCast, all one word, to access. Please drink responsibly. Let's look at one more bourbon, the new Heaven Hill Heritage Collection 17-year-old. It comes from barrels ranging between 17 and 20 years old, and this year's release is the debut for what will become an annual springtime release. This year's edition is bottled at 59.1% ABV. The nose has touches of caramel candies, tobacco leaf, oak tannins, and apple pie. The taste has plenty of baking spices, a soft oakiness, and a hint of nutty character, along with touches of tobacco, leather, apples, and a hint of peaches. Adding water opens up fruitier notes without dampening the spices, and the finish is long and well-balanced with a nice but not overwhelming touch of charred oak. I'm scoring the Heaven Hill Heritage Collection 17-year-old bourbon a 94. Finally, let's take a look at Amrut's fourth release in its Spectrum series. 004 started out in ex-bourbon casks, then went into a complex barrel made with 4 different types of staves: ex-Pedro Jimenez and Oloroso sherry, new charred American oak, and toasted French oak. It's bottled at 50% ABV. The nose is aromatic with touches of orange peel, molasses, gentle spices, figs, dates, oak, and just a hint of vanilla. The taste is thick and slightly astringent with spicy notes of clove, cardamom, and cinnamon, balanced by orange oil, a hint of roasted nuts, figs, and dates. The finish is long and gentle with subtle spices. It is every bit as complex as the cask recipe would suggest. I'm scoring the Amrut Spectrum 004 a 94. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Sagamore Spirit. I'll be adding these tasting notes to our searchable list of nearly 3,300 different whiskeys from all over the world. Check it out this week at whiskycast.com.
While there are several claims to the first highball in the United States, Dewar's is certainly amongst them. The highball trend was born and proliferated in Japan as a more sessionable and alternative approach to enjoying whiskey. Sure, neat or perhaps with a drop of water or two is the best way to enjoy whiskey, but it isn't always the most refreshing. With infinite spins and twists on this relatively simple cocktail, it's important to start with premium ingredients. Our latest innovations like Dewar's 8-year Caribbean rum cask finish or our 8-year Mizunara cask finish are both complex, double-aged whiskeys that will stand up to the chill of ice and effervescence of soda nicely. The base recipe is simple, but the trick is temperature. Fill a chilled Collins glass with ice. Add 2 ounces of your favorite Dewar's over the ice, top with club soda right from the fridge, and lastly, throw in a lemon wedge or peel and serve. More time in the sun, less behind the bar. Curious? Begin with a basic highball recipe, then start experimenting based on your personal taste and flavor preferences. Sky's the limit.
Let's open up the inbox now for Your Voice, presented by Scarabus, Islay Single Malt Scotch Whiskey. Had this comment on the end of the UK whiskey tariffs from Daniel Flett at dboyflett on Twitter. Wonder if we, the consumer, will see it on the shelf price. Well, there is that old law of economics that prices rarely ever come down after they go up, but that may not quite apply in this case. That's because in many cases, the large whiskey brands just ate the cost of the tariffs in order to stay competitive and maintain market share. The smaller brands that couldn't afford to do that largely lost their European and UK export business over the last 4 years. They're the ones that will have to build that business back up once the tariff goes away for good on June 1st. They'll benefit from U.S. government-funded market access programs designed to promote exports of American agricultural products. Daniel, I hope that answers your question. If you have a question, suggestion, or anything else you'd like to share with whiskey lovers around the world, you can always track me down on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram at WhiskyCast. The email address, comments@whiskycast.com. Your Voice is presented by Scarabus, the unique Islay single malt forged by the whiskey-making traditions of 3 generations of the Lang family. Look for it at your local Total Wine and More store in the U.S. and specialist whiskey shops worldwide. Find out more at hunterlang.com. Let's close out the show now with Behind the Label, our look at the science, history, and people who make whiskey unique. It's brought to you by Writer's Tears. We've talked before about the challenges distillers face in working with rye compared to malted barley, corn, wheat, and other grains. Part of that stems from the chemical composition of rye. It tends to be a lot oilier than other grains, in addition to its legendary tendency to foam up during fermentation. Law's Whiskey House in Denver just released its latest bottled in bond San Luis Rye, a 7-year-old whiskey. Head distiller Sam Poirier explained some of the difficulties in distilling their ryes during a Zoom call with whiskey writers this week.
The cooking process itself isn't as challenging, mainly because rye doesn't gel in the cooker like corn does. Corn, if you get to a certain temperature, it will solidify on you and pretty quickly. That's kind of what Al's talking about when he had what he describes as lava shooting all over the place. And it's a pretty accurate description. Hot, sticky, sugary mash that will burn anything that it touches. Rye, although it's very slimy and thick and gooey, viscous, it doesn't gel on us. So the cooking process isn't that difficult in comparison to bourbon, but it is very high in certain proteins that wear on the equipment. I mean, it coats the equipment, it puts a film on it, a skin. So there's a lot more cleaning when we're making rye. What you guys just are describing with the foaming, when we transfer it over into fermentation, it's so thick and viscous that it's trapping all that CO2 in the ferment, and it's just pushing the whole thing up and carrying it out. And we've had certain years with higher protein levels in the grain that are just notorious here. I mean, we don't look back on those years fondly. Certain years don't foam as badly. But what will happen is you put it in the fermenter, you pitch your yeast, you're off doing something that same night sometimes, and the yeast, as soon as it's active and it's in there, it's foaming, and you just hear kind of a plop, 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 and you're like, what is that? And you turn around, and it's just coming out of the fermenter. It's all over the sides. It's just slopping onto the ground. You know, the morning shift comes in at 5:30, 6, and it's a pretty terrible thing to walk into in the morning when you have a ferment that's just overflowed all over the sides of the fermenter and all over the floors. So the challenges mostly are in the cleaning of the equipment, the cooker, the fermenter, and the still. Rye is very oily in the spirit. That comes through mostly on that back end towards the tails. And have to stay on top of everything constantly with rye. So we're always happy to make rye. We love it. We love the whiskey, but everyone's always happy to go back to making bourbon.
You'll find my tasting notes for that 7-year-old bottled in bond San Luis Rye at the WhiskyCast website. Thanks to Sam Poirier of Law's Whiskey House in Denver for the explanation. If you have something you'd like to see us look at on an upcoming episode, just use the contact form at whiskycast.com to get in touch with us. Behind the Label is brought to you by Writer's Tears.
Writer's Tears Copperpot. The tears of Ireland's great writers bursting with flavour, humour and angst. Bottled for you to taste. No writers were harmed in the making of this premium Irish whiskey. Writer's Tears Copperpot.
That's all for this edition of WhiskyCast. You'll find links for the stories in this episode in our show notes at whiskycast.com. That's also where you'll find the latest whiskey news, my tasting notes, the calendar of events, the whiskey photo of the week, and, of course, a complete archive of all of our past episodes going all the way back to 2005. Get in touch with us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at WhiskyCast. The email address is comments@whiskycast.com.
Classic Scotch cocktails are making a resurgence, and the Dewar's Highball is a great way to brighten up some of your favorite Scotch whiskey. Dewar's, ice, club soda, and a citrus garnish is all you need. Happy sailing. Cheers.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
Ever wondered where Redbreast got its name? Well, let's go back to 1912 and be glad our bird-watching founder didn't spot the bar-tailed godwit that day.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
WhiskyCast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2022, and comes to you from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening.